So, hi everybody, this is Salsa Hub. I'm Giacomo. Today, I'm with a special guest. He's Jacob Braun. He's a contributor on Seeking Alpha, and he covers mainly tech stocks and biotech stocks. And today, we're going to do a analysis of Cassava Sciences. And so, Jacob, please introduce yourself, and then we'll jump into the presentation.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. So I'm like he said, I'm a writer on Seeking Alpha. I do a work on a variety of other channels, and primarily I've been focused on biotech recently, and specifically one company which we're going to talk about today, which is Cassava Sciences. Personally, I think that Cassava Sciences has the best risk to reward ratio in the market, and we'll go into that later. But I think this is a very exciting company that everyone should have heard about.
Okay. So we'll jump into the video. I have a few questions for him to make it a bit clear how the process of approving certain pharmaceuticals and drugs work, and we'll break that down right now. So we're ready to go.
So the biggest thing with Cassava Sciences is their lead drug, Simufilm, which is for the treatment of moderate to advanced Alzheimer's. And what's so special about this drug is that it takes a novel approach to Alzheimer's. There was a theory in Alzheimer's for years about removing amyloid, and this is what so many drugs have been based around. This is what Biogen's recent drug Aduhelm was based around, and this isn't maybe the right theory because we've had years of drugs based around this previous theory and other similar theories, and we've had years of failure in the AD drug space. So Cassava Sciences comes along while they're working on. They were originally a company called Pain Therapeutics. They were working on a newer, better opioid, and while they were researching this process, they came across this filament A alteration that they found to be common in Alzheimer's patients. Later, once they moved away from Pain Therapeutics, they rebranded the company, turned into Cassava Sciences, and they further looked into this process and realized that they could do something with it. And that's really kind of how they found filament A and they created Simufilm. So Simufilm, like I said, is a novel therapeutic for Alzheimer's. And what it does is it is altered filament A, which is a part of the brain, is all messed up. And really what Simufilm does is it restores it to how it previously was. And part of the reason it's been questioned so much about its effectiveness is because it's not directly related to Alzheimer's. And the best explanation I've heard of this, of why it does work, even though it's not directly related at the end to Alzheimer's, is because it's upstream of the things that matter for Alzheimer's. So it's basically they're fixing a path upstream of the actual problem, which fixes the problems down further on the stream, which eventually fixes the Alzheimer's. And again, people can have a variety of opinions. People can question the data. People can question the science. But as of now, their theory seems to be working because, as we're going to go into later, they have incredible clinical trial results. The biggest thing with Cassava Sciences and Simufilm isn't necessarily their data clinically for me. While it's very good data, I think the most important thing right now is their safety profile. And this slide kind of touches on it. Simufilm has no known safety issues, no adverse side effects. And this is huge. One, because these patients who you're providing are already relatively weak. They're not in great stage. They're old. They're usually have they have a mental health condition. And they're not going to be able to tolerate side effects the same way as people who are younger, people who are healthier. So that's obviously important. But two, it's very difficult not to have side effects. A lot of drugs in the space have side effects, including Aduhelm, Biogen's recent drug. Part of the biggest controversy behind its approval was the side effects. And specifically, I remember They had issues with brain swelling. They had issues with many other big things. And if you're going into this population, those issues can have very adverse side effects or very big effects outside of just the issue, and can eventually even lead to death when maybe necessarily they wouldn't lead to death. So having a good safety profile is absolutely critical in an Alzheimer's drug. Another company recently, Cordexim, had a drug that was canceled by the FDA mainly because of the safety profile of it. So I think that just goes to show that a safety profile is huge. Other drugs out there have good safety profiles, but Cassava Sciences is right there with any of them. Another thing to touch on is that Simufilm has incredible biomarker data. Biomarker data is expected to perform well. And actually, while this isn't the case for neurodegenerative diseases, for oncology drugs, they can be approved just on biomarkers. So that just shows you the value of biomarkers. But for neurodegenerative diseases, there specifically Alzheimer's, there has to be some effect on cognition. But how do you get to cognition? Improvement or slowing down the loss of cognition is through good biomarker data, because the biomarkers are, at the end of the day, the things that affect the disease and show the severity of the disease. So right here, Simufilm, kills it on the biomarkers, and that's always a great thing to see. So Simufilm has been going through an open label study. So what that means is everyone on the study knows that they're taking the drug. And this data typically is not considered as pure as placebo-controlled data. And I totally agree with this. However, in the case of Alzheimer's, the placebo effect has been shown to fall off well before 9 months or 12 months. So I don't think the argument of placebo effect is as important for an open label study in Alzheimer's as it is for other things. If we look at this data, this is really the biggest point for Cassava Sciences. Up to this point, no drug has shown an improvement in cognition longer than 6 months. The current standard of care, Aricept, which is now generic, shows at 6 months, and after 6 months shows a sharp drop, going back down to the same rate of decline as before. While Cassava Sciences, they show improvement to 6 months, to 9 months, and even 12 months. We don't have data past 12 months, and it looks like there's a slowing down between 9 and 12 months. But that's incredible that they can show improvement beyond 6 months to 9 months and even 12 months. That is what separates them from any other drug in clinical trials and any other drug approved, in my opinion. Other drugs, I think they're doing great. They may be approved, but if Simufilm gets approved with this data, they'll be the standard of care because they have the longest effect of showing improvement. In Alzheimer's drugs, really what you want at the minimum is for you to slow cognition, because it's inevitable. Every Alzheimer's patient is a slow decline in cognition. So the minimum you want to slow that rate of fall. The goal is that you can maintain where a person currently is. So if you can just maintain it and then no more, you don't fall anymore. Now the golden standard, the dream case, is you can reverse cognition. So that means you can not just maintain, but reverse and give them previous function back. And this is huge. And like I said, this is what Cassava Sciences does longer than anyone has shown, by 2 times as longer than anyone has shown. And that right there, even if they can just maintain after 12 months, it makes them a game changer. So this slide right here is, in my opinion, the most important slide to the investment thesis of Cassava Sciences. Okay, so right here, this slide is kind of a continuation of the previous slide, and it touches on that placebo effect. there have been many Alzheimer's studies over thousands of people, as both of these saints have said, both of these saints say, that show the placebo effect. We have great data about the placebo effect, and we know that the placebo effect really doesn't last very long. Additionally, we can see kind of just the decline of the placebo people. And if you notice, there's a big difference, basically the opposite direction of our drug, Simufilm is. And I think that's huge. It shows that really, even though it's open label, people who have the placebo don't still go on that same decline that's inevitable in Alzheimer's. And people on Simufilm don't necessarily go down that same path. They go in the complete opposite direction. And that's huge. The people who are in the open label extension have now gone into a cognitive maintenance study, so CMS. Basically what that is half the people will go off the drug and half the people will stay on the drug. And they're going to compare the people who went off the drug with the people who went on the drug to see a few things. One, going off the drug, do you lose the restoration and you fall back in cognition? Does staying on the drug for longer just continue to increase or continue to maintain? And then just the difference between the two. And then second, you're going to see they're going to go back after, it says based on, or the primary endpoint, 12 to 18 months. So after that time in the cognitive maintenance study, you're going to go back to everybody being on Simufilm. So then what you're going to see is, well, you took these people off and now you put them back on. What does that affect? And then also for the people who have stayed on it the whole time, what does that affect? And there's only 6 months people are off of it, but I think it will provide a lot of very interesting data about what is the effects once you come off and what is the long-term effect. And once you come off, can you come back on and then kind of just return that previous cognition back? So a lot of interesting data would come out of this study. So Cassava Sciences has reached what is called an SPA with the FDA. So that's a special protocol assessment for both of its phase 3 trials. An SPA isn't necessary for a phase 3 trial, but it's helpful because basically you're meeting with the FDA and going over your trial ahead of time. So they have some say in the trial process and what the endpoints are. So then you don't get through the whole trial, come to the FDA and have them tell you, well, we don't like how the trial was designed. Your endpoints are wrong and you have to redo it all. And which would be a huge blow to the company, to all the money you've spent already, on and on and on. By meeting with them ahead of time and the FDA kind of giving this SPA, everyone agrees that this is the trial and this is what we're trying to get out of it. And if we get out of it, then that's really good. You can see they have 2 trials. Both of them doing slightly different things. One's 12 months, one's 18 months. Again, you can read into it. ADS-COG is a cognition test. ADCS, ADL, that's basically a functional living test. Both are very important, especially the ADCS. I keep talking about cognition, but the ADCS, ADL test, that's basically how is someone able to function in their life. And it's very important for Alzheimer's patients because many of them need caregivers, and the more they're able to function, the less care they need from others. And then you just see some secondary endpoints, including the behavior scale, which again, this one's I think maybe a little overlooked because behavior scale is very important. Again, because we have so many people in Alzheimer's are dealing with caregivers. If they act up or misbehave, which is very commonly seen in Alzheimer's patients, that just makes the job of the caregiver much more difficult. So if they can, the drug can help them behave better, then it's very valuable to the caregivers. So real quick, the last thing I want to talk about is the financials of the company. I think financials are so big for biotech companies, especially in today's environment. The market environment is not good for fundraising. You're not going to be able to go out and get a very good price to raise capital. And just because the whole XBI just hit a 52-week low, so the whole biotech sector's down. The whole market is in a place of uncertainty, so that doesn't help. And second, right now, Cassava Sciences is kind of embroiled in some controversy, which we'll talk about later, I'm sure. And that's not going to help Cassava Sciences get good prices on their stuff. However, that's not an issue because they have 241 million in cash on hand. They have no debt. They think their cash is enough to get them through all phase 3 trials and to where they need to be for a drug approval. Their estimated expenditures for 2021 was 30 million. This will go up with those phase 2 trials. Phase 3 trials are very expensive, but they have enough cash to make it through phase 3s. And basically what that does is they have enough cash to get to a point where they can start bringing in cash from the approval of the drug. Or worst case scenario, the phase 2 trials don't go as planned, then they'll have to reassess. So for the year of 2021, Cassava Sciences was, for most of the year, the top performing stock and ended up being one of the top, I believe, 5 performing stocks for the year. So anytime you have a stock that was so well performing, I think the question always is, will it continue to perform well, or will it continue to fall back? And this is definitely something people have thought about a lot. And this year, it's not done crazy well. We have a chart that shows that it's up just under 10% on the year. But last year, I believe it was up over 500%. So obviously very good returns last year. And I think the best years are just ahead for it.
Can you tell us a bit why, from the peak of August, what are the events that caused the stock to drop that much? Can you sum them up briefly?
For sure. So the real movements in the stock start in February of 2021. And on this day, we see the stock go from around $8 to I saw it trading up to 100 and after hours, and $60. I believe 63 was the price it closed at one day. This point right here was when they all of a sudden out of nowhere released their cognition results at 6 months. Again, remember, 6 months at this point was the best cognition data people ever had seen, and that was on Aricept. So they show at 6 months they have cognitive improvement, which is huge. They have a drug that has the potential to be one of the best, right? After this, you see a slow fall back down, and then that's where we see our massive run up over the last year to August. So leading, our big day is actually in late July, not August, and that is a conference called AAIC, and which is the International Alzheimer's Conference. And the company says ahead of time, believe it was late May, we are presenting our 9-month cognition data at this conference. And again, remember, the best data at this point was 6 months. So cognition data at 9 points is very critical to show that they're the best drug. They would be the best drug that's ever been seen for this. We have a massive run up leading to this event. Right before the event, we see a little bit of a dip, a sort of a sell the news, or like sell the anticipation. And then we see a massive spike up until we get to our day in our late July. And then the day that they announced the data, it fell 50%. And I think that was really just a case of sell the news, because the data they announced was the best that we'd ever seen. And so when you see the best data and you see this big run up, you question why it didn't just explode right then. But I think, it was just a case of sell the news, even though it was very promising. The run up looks good and the data looks good. For some reason, the stock fell back down. Granted, the stock then started to recover. People, I think, maybe further took it in right afterwards. A few months afterwards, they released the 12-month data, again, continuing to show that they're the best drug that we've seen so far in clinical trials. And then the real kicker happens, and that is in late August. a citizen's petition is written to the FDA for them to stop the Cassava Sciences phase 3 trials over ethical concerns and safety concerns. And really, this is the controversy that we're in right now. So that leads to this massive drop at the end of August. And, we see some spikes here and there. But overall, we're just kind of at a lower price.
Can you break down more or less? I will put a link in the description. But anyway, can you break down a little bit how the FDA process of approval for these kind of drugs work, and what are the missing steps that Cassava Sciences have to go through in order to get this drug approved?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm just going to talk about the generic process, and we can relate it back to Cassava Sciences. Okay. So specific to Cassava Sciences, Alzheimer's disease has been a graveyard for new drug development. Many drugs over the past 20 years, from the big pharmaceutical companies down to small biotech companies, have tried to develop something for this field because it's 40 million. Alzheimer's is 40 million people, and there's no great treatment on the market. If you can find something for it, you're going to find a massive revenue generator. But the general process is you go through all your preclinical. So you go to your animal studies, you go to your things before animal studies. You come up and then you show we want to start clinical trials. You get to your clinical trials, you go to a phase 1 trial. A phase 1 trial typically lasts, each of these phases, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, typically lasts 1 to 2 years. An NDA has a set amount of time, it's about around a year that it takes. So an NDA is a new drug application. Your phase 1 trial typically has a 63% success rate. These are generic. The link he's pointing in the bio will show further. You can look into specifics. Again, these are generics across all medical types. For Alzheimer's specifically, these numbers are way lower. And also for just CNS diseases in general, these numbers are lower. But the success rate after phase 1 in general is 63%. The success rate after phase 2 trials is 30%. So this is the big hump. And the reason that this is so big is because phase 1, phase 2 trials are relatively small. They can be done relatively cheaply. But a phase 3 trial is very expensive. So if you're going to move to a phase 3 trial, you need to make sure that everything's looking solid and that you have a good chance of approval. So a lot of the stop at a phase 2 isn't necessarily because of bad data, but it's just because they don't think it's good enough. So phase 2, 30%. Phase 3 is 58% success. And then an NDA, a new drug application, is 85%. So we've already gone through 2 of the 3 lowest. So the phase 1 where the Cassava Sciences is through. Phase 2, the big hump, Cassava Sciences is already through. And now we're at phase 3 and the new drug application. Sometimes you do a phase 4, a post-approval clinical trial. I'm not sure if Cassava Sciences would have this, but that's definitely something to think of. So the phase 3 trial, 58% approval in general, and that's what Cassava Sciences is in. I think that this is much lower for Alzheimer's drugs, but also the key endpoints for Alzheimer's approval are cognition and that ADCS ADL, which is like your standard or your function of living. So even if there's been very poor data in the past, if you can prove the endpoints, then you can get an approval.
Okay. So do you have any, let's say, growth projections for Cassava Sciences in case the drugs succeeds at all the stages and gets approved by the FDA?
For sure. This is a little bit more of an interesting question in my opinion, because I've seen projections up to $100 billion a year in revenue down to more 10 to 20 billion a year. I think most people think that there'll be pretty big revenue generated upon an approval. The question really is how much. So I'm going to just basically walk you through how that calculation is made, and you can kind of think of your own way, your own number. So the drug is expected to be sold for about $15,000 a year. There's a market of 40 million people in the US alone who have Alzheimer's and would be able to take this drug. So you have a market of 40 million. You don't have any great therapy on the market. The one therapy that is commonly used, it's kind of like the standard of care, only works for 6 months. So in essence, the whole market's wide open. The question is how much, what percent of that market are you going to get? The bigger the percent, the bigger the revenue. A lower percent, you're going to generate more 5, 10, 20 billion. A higher percent, 50, 60 plus billion. You think about that. Again, I don't know the exact number because we don't know what the market penetration will be. I think at the minimum, you should expect a 10% market penetration. And, even honestly, for the most bullish cases, you shouldn't expect too much more than a 50%. With that being said, you see this revenue being generated from this product. And then you have to think this product will be bringing in all this money. And then you have a P to E, so a price to earnings ratio. That number is at least probably going to be 10 to 15, which is commonly seen in pharmaceutical companies. And once you think about all those numbers, you can see how people are arriving at evaluations of 40 billion for the company, 50 billion for the company. And considering our current market cap is 2 billion and that we have an upside of potentially 20 times our current market cap over in just a 2-year span, based upon just an approval of the drug, you can see why so many people are interested in this drug.
Okay. And can you break down what are the main competitors that Cassava has in the same field? They're all trying to develop drugs that could take a bite of their possible market share.
For sure. So Aricept is kind of the standard of care, which is now generic and goes by the name of donepezil, which is this like scientific name of the drug. Also, you have Biogen, who recently had an approved drug. However, there's been a lot of controversy around this drug for a variety of reasons, and they only completed 1 million in sales for in the first quarter of approval for their drug. So that I consider that kind of a non-factor. You have a lot of other companies working on things in the space. The biggest ones I've seen will be ANVS, Innovis Biosciences, Anavex Life Sciences, and then you have Eli Lilly's working on one that's in the later stages, and you have other ones in a variety of stages. But basically, most big pharmaceutical companies are at least looking into Alzheimer's and have something that might work. And then a lot of smaller companies are looking into Alzheimer's. So because it's such a big market, so much potential. So this is a very competitive space with a ton of people competing for it, but no one's really come out on top and has a drug that's the game changer. So while there may be a lot of competition, I don't think the competition is too much to consider until someone gets approved and looks very strongly. I recently wrote actually about Anavex Life Sciences on Seeking Alpha. So I think Anavex Life Sciences has some good data so far, but I don't think they're a threat to Cassava Sciences if their data continues to hold up, because they don't really have data that shows something totally different than Aricept or donepezil. In essence, they have very similar data that's a little bit better.
I saw recently that a few lawsuits have been made against Cassava Sciences. Can you tell us a bit what are they about, and are they possible threats, and could we see something like fines or something like that could hit Cassava Sciences in the near future?
Yeah, I think this is a very big between this, the citizens petition, and the heavy short interest in the stock. It really creates there's a big bear side to the stock as well as a very big bull side to the stock. So whenever you have a big side that's very for stock and very against the stock, it's going to create a very controversial stock. And I think Cassava Sciences is about as controversial as I've seen recently. Um, the lawsuits again, there's a lot of different things that would be thrown out by either side, but the lawsuits, the main ones I've seen, are in regards specifically to statements that have been made by the company that they feel have been misleading. For example, on a conference call that the company did, I believe 2 quarters ago, they said that they were gonna make the company had a non-dilutive cash thing coming up in the next weeks to months, which you can interpret that as you will. The company, again, at the beginning of call says, these are forward-looking statements. Nothing of them should be taken as facts. So to kind of try to protect themselves. But the company said this, and this events never came about. Granted, right after they said that was when like way more of this controversy started. So that kind of hurt a lot of the momentum. Additionally, some other statements have been made by the company that people feel are misleading. I don't think anything will really come of it in the long term. There's lawsuits, to my understanding, there's lawsuits going more than just towards Cassava Sciences. There's lawsuits going towards people who have also made statements against Cassava Sciences because they're saying you're manipulating the market by releasing short reports. For example, there was a short report released, which was part of the citizens petition and all that package. And the people who released the short report were currently shorting the stock, and the stock plummets, right? So there's definitely a lot of accusations being made by a variety of parties against people who are against the stock and people who are for the stock in regards to lawsuits. I don't want to comment on what I think is right or wrong or who I think is going to prevail in the end necessarily, but I would say that more than likely there's lots of lawsuits going on behind the scenes, and there's also a lot of investigations going on, or at least people in government agencies have looked into this stock.
Okay. And my last question that I have is, in the case of these smaller biotech companies, is there a big possibility that in case they discover something big like Cassava Sciences could do, they get acquired by a larger company through M&A process? Is it something that happens frequently or not?
Yeah, that's very frequent. I think a buyout is what most people would refer to, like what they would call it in the biotech space, and I think that was kind of the goal and hope for most people after the phase 2. The company itself, like explicitly has stated multiple times, they are drug developers. They're not people who want to release a drug. They don't want to deal with all the marketing, all the gain, all the networks out there, because they don't have the infrastructure like a big pharmaceutical company would. So they've explicitly said they don't want to be a part of that. They just want to develop the drug. From what I was thinking, I thought they were trying to get rid of it before the start of phase 3, but they had all this controversy which scared away any buyer. You're not going to get the price that they're going to want for it with all this controversy going on. Once this controversy clears up, you get into phase 3s, potentially you could see a buyout. But even with that, I don't think that any company can pay the price that Cassava Sciences is going to ask. Cassava Sciences, from what they're looking at, they have, again, the best cognition data we've ever seen in an Alzheimer's drug. If they can show that in a phase 3, it's going to, in my opinion, become a blockbuster drug. Again, they have to show that in a phase 3 that's placebo controlled, and then they have to continue with good safety results. But if they can show those two things, I don't see how they wouldn't get approved by the FDA. And then if you get an approval from the FDA, you're going to be generating an insane amount of revenue. So again, I don't see a company being able to pay the buyout price that they're going to ask. So I think that's kind of off the table. I could see a company buying us.
For the moment. Are you saying for the moment?
Permanently. Because at this point, unless the company doesn't do well in their trials, which then why would someone want to buy them out necessarily? But as long as they're doing well, I don't think there's any chance of a buyout. The largest acquisition ever to date was Warner Lambert by Pfizer for $100 billion about 10 years ago. I think Cassava Sciences might be asking for something similar to this, because they think they think they have the potentially best selling drug of all time. That's the line I use a lot. Because Simufilm, if it is approved, could become the best selling drug of all time. And when you consider that, that's a lot of money to be made, and you're not going to be selling that cheaply. So I don't think a buyout is going to happen at all. Okay. Some other options. A company could buy a stake. So not the whole company, but buy 10%, 15%. I think this is a little bit more likely if you're talking like an option. But I think the most likely option is a partnership. So the company will take an upfront payment, and in exchange will give a percent of the revenue or percent of the sales or something of the drug to that company in the long term. And they'll most likely do that with a big pharmaceutical company that's got experience in distributing drugs and marketing new drugs, and just so right away they can ramp up the sales and sell it to a bunch of people.
Okay, great. So I'm done with questions, and is there something else you want to cover? Or if not, I really want to thank you for your availability and for giving us all these explanations and the blueprint of what Cassava is doing right now and what it could become in the future. So thank you for that.
For sure. Thank you for having me on. The one thing I'd say is this isn't financial advice. This is just my opinion on different things. If you have any more questions feel free to reach out to me on my Twitter at @RealJacobBraun. I try to be very active on there, answering questions people have. As far as this company, I think it's a great opportunity, but definitely do your own research and due diligence. There are a lot of people who are very against the stock and have opinions on why they are. And there's a lot of people very for the stock. I would read some of both of those materials if you're thinking about investing in the stock, and really come to your own conclusions on if you want to take the risk reward bet in a sense, or if, I'd rather watch from the sidelines. Just think about that before you invest in the stock. But otherwise, there's a great community of people like I said, for and against the stock. But I really like the community of people who are for the stock. They call themselves the Savages, and you can see a lot of great information. For example, Joe Springer is on YouTube. He has a lot of videos out there, and there's a good community of people who will help you stay informed about if you want to follow the company.
Okay, great. By the way, Jacob's Twitter link to the Twitter account will be in the description, so it'll be easy for you to find him. And this is it for today. I'm Giacomo. This is SAVA Hub. See you next time.